Get to the bottom of what's truly healthy in this crazy, complex world, so you can take back what is rightfully yours. Welcome to the Health Sovereign Podcast. This is your host, Logan Christopher.
Hello and welcome back. Second episode. What I will be starting in this episode, talked about it last time, and we'll be continuing for the next number of episodes. We may interrupt it with some of the first interviews here, but I'll be taking the points in the Health Sovereign Creed and talking quite a bit more about them. I'm thinking 2 points per episode. So to dive right in, we're going to start with that first point, and I'll read it again in case you're not familiar. You can go to healthsovereign.com and download this or see it on the website there, all 16 points. You can also listen to the first episode if you missed that, and you will find the whole thing read out loud there. So point number 1. I understand that health starts from a place of self-responsibility, that no one, not a doctor, especially not insurance nor the government, will care about my health or the health of my loved ones as much as I do. Therefore, I will educate myself, taking radical responsibility for both my actions and inactions. Quite a few things in there that I really want to go into further. So self-responsibility, and there is a reason this is point number 1, because if you do not have or are not coming from this place of self-responsibility, are not coming from this place of sovereignty, as we talked about in that first episode, then you are putting your health out there. You're reactive in your health. Things will happen to you and you may not think it's your fault or you were not responsible for them. And then it's on to other people in order to cure them. And that is really what our Western medical model is all about. I want to read this thing. I wrote one of the, if you follow me on Lost Empire Herbs or social media, it's on Facebook and Instagram, but lately I've been doing these writings called the Medical Monopoly Monday Musings. So I want to read one of these because it is specifically about this point. Self-responsibility versus blind following of authority. Specialization has benefits and drawbacks. The most obvious benefit is that it allows someone to go deep into a subject, possibly deeper than has ever been done before, and that can then benefit everyone else. The obvious drawback is that when such a thing is done, such an area becomes a subject that a layperson sometimes cannot make sense of. And so, let's look at doctors. There's 4 years for a bachelor's degree, then 4 more years of medical school. This is followed by 3 to 7 years in residency and fellowship to further specialize. Have you heard the joke about the left kidney doctor who won't operate or discuss the right kidney? That's a lot of time. That's a lot of knowledge and experience. That is far removed from the layman. So doctors are held up as this almost holy bastion of authority within the culture. Rightfully so to some degree, but we have to look at the dark side of this pattern. All that education, which is ultimately funded and therefore created by guess who, pharmaceutical and medical device companies, means a doctor is indoctrinated into a specific way of thinking, of viewing the world, one that generally doesn't allow for outside viewpoints, aka anything in alternative medicine. Some doctors become ego-driven by such authority, and how dare anyone question them? That's on the doctor's side, but what about the patient? You and I understand that doctor did all that schooling. We understand doctors are smart people, probably smarter than you or I. They have authority. Our culture holds them up in that way. So you should listen to them, right? After all, who has the time to actually look into the health subject deeply themselves? This combination of factors and more is why the responsibility of health has largely been given blindly to doctors. But there is an agency problem here. The average doctor sees 20 patients per day. Even if that doctor cares, really cares about you, they can't possibly care as much as you do. They do not have the same skin in the game as you do for yourself and your family. So ultimately, where should responsibility lie? Self. If the interest is in health, it must start there. That doesn't mean not to listen to your doctor. You can do so, just not blindly. I know there's this idea that you shouldn't confuse your Google search with a medical degree. Sure, if you spend 15 minutes or blindly believe the first thing you read, that is good advice. But also, a doctor's proper place is as an advisor. They should not be the only one. After all, that is what second and third opinions are about. But you might also want to look at not just talking to doctors, but functional medicine specialists, acupuncturists, health coaches, energy medicine practitioners, shamans, etc. I know that many doctors would laugh at this idea, but many of them have just as much schooling. Different worldviews, different advice, and ultimately, your health choices are yours. Self-responsibility in health. That must be the starting point of our new health paradigm. Will you claim yours back today? A lot of good points in here as well. One thing I do want to point out, because it confused someone when I posted this on social media, is when I'm saying that the doctor's education is funded by pharmaceutical and other companies, I'm not saying that they fund the individuals themselves, but they are funding the schools themselves as far as creating that education. That is definitely a big piece in there, and why the education is steered in certain directions. Of course, the doctors pay a lot of money to go through medical school, and then they have a lot of debt. Well, everyone going through college these days has student debt, and so they get trapped in this machine. This is another of the systemic effects where they really need to operate in a certain way in order to be able to make money and pay back this debt. So that's one of the reasons that many doctors will not opt out of the system in place, because that system, in essence, financially controls them, or definitely financially incentivizes them to stay part of it, with kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies and all kinds of other stuff that is in play there. But that's getting a little bit off topic of the self-responsibility, though it is important to understand that this stuff happens, and therefore not only may your doctor not have the skin in the game that you do, but if they're being financially incentivized to do things that may not be in your best interest, that is crucial detail to know. So what else do I want to say about this self-responsibility here? It really is about radical responsibility. What I mean by that is, well, as I said here, taking radical responsibility for both my actions and inactions. Whatever you do, everything that you do is going to impact your health to some degree. And also the things you don't do impact your health. So you have to take the responsibility for these things. So the food that you eat, the air that you breathe, the water that you drink. Yeah, it sucks that these things are polluted to a large degree and that these affect our health. If you are not going to do the things to clean those up, and that can only be done to a certain degree because of this web of ecology we live in, then you must understand the results of what you're doing. So if you are taking and consuming pesticide heavy food, right, and that's your daily fare, you just eat conventional food, there is a cost to that. Your actions in eating this food are going to have a cost. Now, this is where the education piece comes in, and education is so important to self-responsibility. If you don't have the education to know that pesticides are going to have these negative, long-term, chronic health effects, then you're kind of shit out of luck. Unfortunately, that is the case. But that's the thing about self-responsibility, right? You have to come to understand these things. What is at play in the world in order to be sovereign with your health? In order to effectively make choice, you must have the education, because a lot of this information is... well, there's too much information out there, but there is disinformation about these things. All the pesticide companies want you to keep consuming that pesticide-laden food. Why? Because they profit off of doing so. So you have to look at all these different effects. And that's what radical self-responsibility is about, is understanding all these factors at play so that you can make the best decisions possible. That's the really hard part, right? So who has the time for this? You know, it's easy for me to talk about this, right? Because my career essentially is in the health field. A little bit funny, it's not that I wanted to go in this place. It's not that I started in this place. Is from the fitness and really wanting to excel at that peak performance level that I started to get into health. And I just kind of went further and further down the rabbit hole. I'd like to think that even if I did not make this a career, if this was not any part of what I was teaching you, if I was not recording this podcast for you here, that I would still be interested in health. Health is one of those areas that everyone needs to take an interest in. This is, once again, self-responsibility. Why? Because ultimately your health is up to you. You cannot abdicate health to a doctor because, unfortunately, the doctors do not know everything. They can't care as much as you. So it is going to come down to what you know and what you don't. And here's the thing, if you get some sort of diagnosis or something going on, you can do research, you can read books, you can listen to podcasts, you can educate yourself. It's not something that's hard to do. I'll give just another example, right? Finances. Important to everyone because we, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, we need money to operate in this world. There are negatives and positives to that, but we all need to work with money. So isn't money something you should learn about, you should get educated in so that you can properly use it rather than getting up to your eyeballs in debt and just kind of going through life in a consumerist mode. It is important to do this. So money is not something that I teach about. I wrote a little book covering my system of how I manage my money just because that was a fun project for me. But money is not a main thing of what I do as far as my career teaching in the world. But I have to manage money both personally and for my businesses. So it's something that I have read plenty of books on. I have listened to podcasts. I've studied, gone to workshops. Not a part of my career, but important. And so finances and health, relationships, fitness, parenting, if you're a parent, all these things are important facets of just being a human in this day and age. So you need to take self-responsibility for them. Obviously, if you do go into one of these fields, that makes it easier to really go deeper on it. But every human needs to take self-responsibility in these places. So I think that is a good point to wrap up on point number 1 there. Let's move on to point number 2. I recognize that there are hundreds, if not thousands, of modalities for affecting health, whether physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual. I will find those that work for me. I will not give up after 1, 2, or 10 have not gotten me to where I want to go. Well, I want to add energetic here because in my coaching program, different places I've been talking about the 5 levels of health where I look at them: physical, energetic, mental, emotional, and spiritual. So I should definitely have that in the creed. The allopathic model, which is Western medicine, pharmaceuticals, surgery, all that stuff, is just one modality. And yeah, we could subdivide it. There are several different things there. We could separate surgery and pharmaceutical medicine, 2 different categories. Understand that these are just a couple of the things out there, and they really focus on that physical level. The surgery is formula like manipulation of the body, and then pharmaceutical would be a biochemical viewpoint of the body and treating health. But this is just such small things. Other physical things, other forms of manipulation, right? So chiropractic would fit in there, working with an osteopath, different ways of looking at the posture and movements. There are tons of different methods of doing this. Some other biochemical means, right? Herbalism. And there's different ways of practicing herbalism, Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, and actually the West, right? In the United States, we had other schools of medicine. There was the physiomedicalists, there's the eclectics. Most people have never even heard of these terms. I know I hadn't until I dove deep into herbalism history. These schools were around and were being successful before the Flexner report came around and really put us on this path of allopathic medicine. And trust me, we will be talking about the Flexner report a lot more in the future because that was a crucial turning point in how we got to the health worldview we have these days. So those are just some of the physical methods of working on health, but there's so much more. We often forget about the mental and emotional components, right? So we have different types of psychology. You have the old standards like the cognitive behavioral therapy. You have Freud's methods and Jung's method and all kinds of stuff. We could throw neuro-linguistic programming, of which I'm a trainer, in here as well. There's lots of different things, and these are really built into Chinese medicine and Ayurveda as well. Any of the systems, really besides allopathic medicine, is a holistic system. It kind of treats the body as a whole, so they recognize that the physical is not divorced from the mental and vice versa, that manipulations or changes on one level affects the different levels. We have all kinds of other stuff. Homeopathy is very interesting, and I'll probably talk more about this later. It's not a field I've gone very deep into. I certainly saw several meta-analysis out there saying that homeopathy is no more effective than placebo, but then I've also seen studies that showing it is working, and I think it really has to do with how the homeopathy is applied. And here's the thing, if it gets placebo results reliably, which it seems to do, then is that not worth it off of a thing that basically there's nothing there, so there's no real side effects involved if you can get results? I've started experimenting with some homeopathic remedies recently. I had really bad allergies as I was traveling through Europe earlier this summer, and I got a homeopathic formula, and literally from the first dose, it cleared things up 90%. So whether that was placebo or it worked, right? And I'm interested in the results of it. If I can take that rather than taking some antihistamine, lower impact intervention, which is getting ahead to other points, very great results in doing that. So I plan to explore this area more. And there's, as I mentioned, functional medicine doctors, there's naturopaths. So there are these holistic medical doctors of these other things that look at not only the possible use of drugs and surgery, but all kinds of other interventions. Then we have the various energetic forms of healing. So Qigong and the various types of this and Tai Chi out there. We have all kinds of energy medicine practices out there. I mean, there's Reiki is one of the most popular ones, but the quantum touch for health. I got certified in a method called Eden Energy Medicine. And I've done a lot of these things. Again, it was for that point of peak performance. And just talking about it here, realizing that because I have this mindset of health is not just the absence of disease, but health is that ability to respond to stressors at a higher and higher level, because I wanted to perform at a higher and higher level with strength training, but also in other places, that my seeking of health modalities was for this purpose. And I found lots of stuff, and that's why I do quite well, is because I've taken these other models that most people apply just to disease and symptom management and curing, and applied them in these other ways. So that's been really interesting. And then you have also some of these categories that map across different levels. So for instance, energy psychology is both the energy method and working on those mental and emotional levels. Let's see, what else? I got some other things written here. Oh, there's all kinds of weird stuff that most people don't even necessarily think of for health, but it's available. Shamans. So lots of people have cured problems by going down to the rainforest and jungle, working with shamans with the use of psychoactive substances or not. All kinds of different methods, all kinds of different shamans from across the world. Hypnotists. You even have medical mediums, people that one way or another are getting sometimes very accurate diagnoses and then being able to cure people in different ways. And you have prayer and miracles, right? I know a lot of scientifically mindset people, reductionist, materialist, would scoff at these things, but you can see and you can say it's just placebo, but if someone is blind and gets cured by God or some intercessor there, and sometimes there are actual results with this kind of stuff. My point is not that any one of these systems is better than the other, especially without what the specific context is, but there are so many things here. Oh, here's some other I forgot. Phototherapy, heliotherapy, that is actually treatment from the sun itself, has been used to cure certain diseases. It used to be popular, is not so much. We can look at other electrical methods with stim or all kinds of different stuff, pulse magnetic devices, craniosacral rolfing. There are so many modalities out there. And if you hear the stories of healing from people, you recognize that there's always these weird paths that they have. No one method works for everyone. And that is a very important thing to understand. These different methods work for different people. So when you try one thing and it doesn't work, then move on, try something else. And what I would encourage you to do is to understand that in the beginning, when you have some sort of, especially chronic illness, right? So if you have your arm chopped off, Western medicine, acute emergency trauma, that is where it shines. Definitely do that. I would not go to a shaman or a craniosacral therapist when your limb is chopped off and lying there bleeding, right? So understanding that different context, certain elements or certain methods do shine. But if you are having some sort of spiritual existential crisis, loading yourself up on antidepressants is probably not the best move. There are better methods for working with that. If you have some sort of chronic illness, so what is on the rise today is all forms of chronic illness, and often they're called mystery illness, things that are hard to diagnose. Many people go around from doctor to doctor trying to find out what they have and thus being able to treat it in one way or another. And although we slap labels on things, which does have its use at times, sometimes these labels can be wrong, and sometimes people then get wrapped up in the identity of the label. So there are some drawbacks to that as well. What I would encourage you is not only to work on different methods, but from the very outset, it is worth going to not just doctors, but these other sort of practitioners to see what they may say is the root cause or the problem. Understand that so much of what treatment you may seek out begins with that original diagnosis or original frame. So if you can understand that there are 1,000 different modalities out there and you have some experience, going back to education and self-responsibility, right? So you have some experience in a handful of these modalities. No one can do them all. No one can definitely go deep in more than just a couple of these. If you have that available, then you can better, from the beginning of any sort of say injury, pain, illness, anything that you have more options with which to go with it. With the predominant worldview that is going on as far as Western medicine being the only thing out there, this binds so many people that it becomes hard to look outside. And oftentimes the only time they begin to look outside is when Western medicine has failed them. What if instead of waiting to that point, which could be spending thousands of dollars, going through untold misery, because oftentimes, say, like cancer treatments can be quite horrible to go through, what if you sought out some of these other opinions from the very beginning? Would that not change things up? And one thing I completely messed here, just like nutrition, sometimes called orthomolecular medicine. This is the use of supplements and nutrition to heal the body, which in chronic illnesses, well, most chronic illness is about two things. Actually, most illness in the first place is about toxicities, and these can be from heavy metals, various poisons, acute or chronic. That's a big subject area. Then there are nutritional deficiencies. And when you understand that stress, going back to our definition of health, to be able to handle stressors, stress takes nutrients to handle. Doesn't matter where it is in the body, what form it is in, different nutrients will be used, but the body uses nutrients in order to handle stress. To be able to combat disease, the body uses nutrients. Therefore, should we not make sure that any sort of deficiencies are corrected? How many of the chronic diseases are actually deficiencies of some combination of nutrients? That's something we have scarcely explored at all in our Western medicine. So that is point number 2. These are some of the ways that I like to think. So starting from that place of self-responsibility for your health, then recognizing that there are tons and tons of methods, that nothing works for everyone, but there are far more methods available than you probably begin to realize. That having some experience in these methods then allows you to make better health choices moving forward. So I consider that part of your education is recognition of these different levels of health. I like to say 5 different levels: physical, energetic, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And then we can begin to place these modalities across those levels, recognizing that one impacts another. So that chronic illness, you may think, oh, it's sure, at its root, there may be a chronic deficiency of various vitamins and minerals, but there may be a mental, emotional component to that. When you can recognize that these things occur across levels, then ultimately I believe you can get better results. And looking at modalities that are holistic in nature, because once again, Western medicine is based on a reductionist, materialistic paradigm, which means the whole method is based on physical is the only thing that exists. If you can understand that all these levels exist, then your treatments, although they may be focused on one level, can really hit on all the different levels. So that is 2 points. We'll be back with our next episode covering points 3 and 4. Once again, if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review on iTunes. It's really going to help spread this message of health sovereignty out to other people. You can reach me at logan@lostempireherbs.com. I'd love to hear from you on how you're liking these episodes and any specific subject you'd like me to dive into. Of course, do have a plan for the foreseeable future and lots of guests and everything, but I'd love to hear from you as well. This podcast is made possible by the work that we do at Lost Empire Herbs. Herbalism is one of those modalities, and a very useful modality. Here's a cool thing about herbs that most people don't recognize is that we think of them, in general, most people think of them as just this biochemical type of treatment or medical use of herbs. And certainly they are that. They have these chemical components in them that then act on the body. but the herbs themselves are living beings, and there are methods of connecting with them and working with them that hit on the mental, emotional, even spiritual levels. So just going to leave that as some food for thought. I would say that especially the alchemical preparations of such herbs can definitely work on these levels quite a bit more, because it's kind of done with that frame of thinking about the herbs in mind. So some of the stuff we have at Lost Empire Herbs, look for our spagyric tinctures, our ashwagandha, our nettle root, our blue vervain, the mushrooms, that it doesn't just have a physical effect, but can work on these other levels as well. And of course, there's even better things than we carry that work on these even more. So hopefully we can bring some of those to you, some of the spagyric essences and various other types of alchemical preparations in the future. Herbalism is a great method to have in your toolkit. So get educated on it. Understand that herbs have always been used forever until the last 100 years or so, except by a small minority of people. So get a few herbs in your toolkit, understand some herbs, find some herbal allies, those herbs that will help you not only become healthy, but perform at your peak. A lot more information over at lostempireherbs.com. That's going to wrap it up for this episode. I will speak to you again next week.
This is thepodcastfactory.com.